love this place!
Well, this book has powered more fantasies for us Gen Xers than Phoebe Cates did in Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Okay, different fantasies, I grant you, but you know what I mean. Every indispensable D&D monster is in this book. This is, of course, the first edition Advanced D&D Monster Manual. Now, there are over 350 monsters in that seminal work by Gary Gygax, and it's magnificently illustrated by David Sutherland III, Dave Trampier, Tom Wham, and Gene Wells. In an earlier video, I talked about some of the artwork I like in this book for pure inspiration. Today I'm going to list my least favorite monsters in here. While the artwork might influence its inclusion in my list in a few cases, it's mostly just the conception of the monsters that I have an issue with. Now remember too that I love this book, but in any listing of that many things, there's bound to be a few duds, right? So in the words of Joel Hodgson, repeat to yourself it's just a show and you should really just relax. But definitely tell me where I got it right and where I got it wrong in those comments, won't you? Let me know if you want me to do similar lists for the Fiend Folio and the Monster Manual too, both best of and worst of. Now, I try to read as many comments as I can, especially when the video is in its first week. So go ahead and watch the video and share it out if you will. So without further ado, here are my 20 least favorite monsters in the original Advanced D&D Monster Manual. Well, first, let's talk about the Fredo of the demon family, the Type 2 Hezu. This is one of the entries where the art maybe did slightly influence its inclusion on my list. In a section that's as cool as a summer breeze, this guy really does stand out for all the wrong reasons. It's essentially just a giant frog with arms, and it looks suspiciously like it could star in its own 1990s PBS kids show. Like most demons, they cause darkness at will, but in the Hezu's case, it's probably to stop foes from laughing at it in the middle of combat. So unless you do want your players snickering throughout your combats, my advice is to skip right to the Type 3, or just go back and add another Type 1 Vrock. Now, I have never heard of the Morkoth being used anywhere by anyone. Its power is some kind of hypnotic effect inside its lair, where if you fail a pretty hard saving throw, it eats you at its leisure. That's right, you're so hypnotized by it that you have to let it eat you and you really can't do anything about it. Now trust me, I'm no softie when it comes to hardcore monsters that carry a big stick, but I would also just prefer that those monsters not resemble the doodle of a third grader on Ritalin. The Axebeak is essentially just a prehistoric ostrich with a big schnoz, which is fine, but ostriches already get their own entry under flightless birds, so do we really need two of these goofy things? Now, if you've ever lost a character fighting Beakra Streisand here, please let me know. I could use a good laugh. Even back in 1979, Gary had to know that the market on mincing little people was getting a little saturated. Between gnomes, halflings, pixies, sprites, and many more, do we really need the brownie? This guy's as superfluous as a comb on Prince William's nightstand, babe. Pointy nose, pointy hat, pointy shoes. What's the point? That's 3 strikes, Chachi. And like any talent left at Wizards of the Coast these days, you are out of here. I'm sorry, I know some of you probably do like the Bouet, and if you squint, it does look a little threatening. But when Gary himself describes it as a land shark, a combination of a snapping turtle, an armadillo, mixed with a little demon ichor, it's a little hard to take seriously. Maybe Jaws was just on Gary's brain. At any rate, this thing, as powerful as it is, just looks a little weird to me. They even put a fin on it for some reason. And I'm sorry, if my character died to one of these things, my next one is coming back with some oxygen tanks and an M1 rifle. Smile, you son of a... One of the two gotcha monsters on my list, the Rust Monster has been a favorite of many DMs over the years. I've shied away from it for two reasons. First, let's be honest, it exists mostly as a low blow to the players, ruining their normal metal items and even corroding magical weapons and armor that fail a save, which is fine if you're playing in a take-that style game, where everyone has a pretty thick skin. But the second reason I wouldn't use it in most cases is that its ecology and normal use are just way out of whack. These things, which feed off of metal, would just not be found in a dusty tomb, awaiting a group of heroes to pop by every couple hundred years. They'd be in the mountains where the iron ore is, and they'd probably be enormous, and a constant foe of the dwarf. Now that might actually make them an interesting villain in certain situations, but a lone rust monster randomly appearing in a dungeon just always made no sense to me. This is one where the anger of most players for the past 40 years is probably a little bit justified. Now, I don't know if acid was ever dropped at the old TSR offices, but if it was, the Thought Eater would be Exhibit A. These things are dwellers in the ether, floating around and looking like Daffy Duck on the Ravensbrook diet. Most of their powers and effects are psionic related, and even Gary Gygax admitted that the inclusion of psionic rules in the core rulebooks was probably a mistake at the time. That makes this little guy the ultimate red-headed stepchild, doomed to be forgotten over time. Water weirds are life that originate on the elemental plane of water, just like, water elementals. And they pretty much are water elementals. These things always did seem to be a con. The Tide Pods of their day. Same thing, different package, dumber name. Weirder name. Look, just use a water elemental and put it in the form of a snake. There you go. The Nixie, underwater cousin to the Pixie, is another creature that's a little bit superfluous. I mean, we already have the Merman anyway, don't we? What do these guys bring to the table? I'm not a big adventuring underwater DM to begin with, so the chances of me ever using this guy were slim to none. Now, the fact that it looks like it was part of the British rock and roll invasion of the 1960s doesn't help much either. Now, they apparently enslave humans, but only for a term of 1 year. Then I guess the humans are free to go. Maybe the Nixie would have to fill out some immigration forms or pay some kind of tax on them if it's longer than a year. Regardless, the Nixie is very lame, and I just sort of pretend that they don't exist. Look, I'm 6'4", and I really like that 70s song, Short People Got No Reason to Live. Just kidding. But I'm going to complete my list of unnecessary midgets that started with the Brownie and the Nixie, and end it with the Leprechaun. Look, they are just way, way, way too prevalent in pop culture, even back when this book was printed. You couldn't run a campaign world based on Robert E. Howard or Fritz Lieber, inspired by the artwork of someone like Frank Frazetta or Boris Vallejo, and have one of these guys appear. Come on. That is a total campaign ender, and you don't want that. Leave the Leprechaun behind. I'm with David Warner's Evil from Time Bandits on the giant slug.
Slugs! He created slugs. They can't hear, they can't speak, they can't operate machinery. I mean, are we not in the hands of a lunatic?
While I can picture these things being menacing in certain situations, most of the time I picture a slimy thing that moves at a glacial pace and can be outwitted with a light jog. Later on, the Aboleth was created, which is still a bit of an oddball monster, but is at least deserving of some respect and fear from the players. Any foe your players can get away from by walking at a brisk pace is probably one that the DM should take out of the golf bag. Kind of like the Nixie, the Eye of the Deep is another redundant monster whose sole selling point is that it exists underwater. The entry says that it's possible This monster is related to the Beholder. Oh, really? You don't say. It's also possible that Megan Fox having 3 kids out of 3 all be trans might be a little unusual. Now look, I don't mind the Beholder, even though it's becoming a bit ubiquitous with the 5e crowd. Still, the regular Beholder is enough to strike fear in any adventuring party. Putting an inferior version of it in the sea is kind of like putting Jason in space. Tired and unnecessary. Just modify a regular Beholder to have one of its eye stalks cast breathe underwater, and you're good to go. The Zorn, no, not Jim Zorn, the original Seahawks quarterback. Man, I'm old. Looks utterly ridiculous. Like a walking trash can. Your PC should have to make a save versus belly laugh against this thing. And just like the Rust monster, they feast off of metal. So unless you're going into the mining business, you should never run afoul of these things, as they would be strip mining anything they could get their 3 hands on. I'm going to be honest, there's too many oozes, slimes, puddings, gelatins, and other assorted spaghettios in the monster manual. One of them's got to go. And due to the fact that nobody ever seems to use the gray ooze, it's going to be him. Sorry, buddy. Sometimes you're just in the wrong place at the wrong time. See ya. The entry for the Gast starts with, "These creatures are so like ghouls as to be completely indistinguishable from them." I guess they're a little hardier than ghouls, but they always seem to be overlooked. I always reach for the ghoul myself, as the Gast's distinguishing feature is a carrion stench. But I don't know how it would smell any worse than the ghouls it's usually found around. Look, this is just an up-jumped ghoul, a captain, if you will, and it should have just been categorized as such. The Irish deer is a prehistoric moose-sized deer, and I'll be honest, it's only on the list because it's called the Irish deer. I mean, the next time your PCs are in Waterdeep, are they going to order the Denver omelet? Are we going to call the giant crabs Alaskan kings? Come on now. Like most of the real prehistoric creatures in the Monster Manual, I'm probably going to take a pass on this one. The Trapper is the bottom version of the Lurker above. It's pretty much the exact same monster in conception, a trap-style monster that can disguise itself as part of the rock. Even for the early days of D&D, when they were trying to fill out the book with anything they could, this had to raise a few eyebrows. The Lurker above should just be the Lurker, and tweaked to attack from below as well. Back in the old days, when a supernatural or sci-fi show was running out of money, they'd do an Invisible Foe episode to sort of heal the budget. That's how I always viewed the Slithering Tracker. This is a really lame way to kill a party. It's something that's composed entirely of plasma, which should be a little bit visible, but it's actually given a 95% invisibility rating. It can also squeeze through an opening the size of a rat hole, immobilize its prey, drag it away, and kill it in 6 turns. I'm not even sorry about this one. Pack your things and slither on out of here. Including the Flesh Golem might be a little bit controversial, but I just don't think it belongs in D&D, with one exception. Look, the artwork for this one is by the great Dave Trampier, and it's really, really cool. But it also sort of verifies that the foundation for this creature is Frankenstein's monster. That monster is inexorably tied to the story of a man playing God and being ruined by his creation. D&D is a different realm, where spells that tamper in God's domain are practiced regularly. There should really be no difference between the Flesh Golem and any other creature that's raised by a necromancer and given a few basic instructions. They make the Flesh Golem a little bit tougher and prone to going berserk because, well, Frankenstein's monster went berserk. Like many of the things on my list, it just doesn't fit. Unless you're playing in the realm of Ravenloft, or a distinctly low magic setting. Then I suppose you could make the flesh golem work. Other than that, let's save him for a true horror RPG experience. I don't like the mimic. Like the metal-eating creatures on this list, it would not inhabit the tombs and dungeons where most DMs probably put them. They would be in open caves where there's high animal traffic, which is their source of food. What really steams me is that the original picture for it shows it as a treasure chest, which now seems to be its default form. And that's slightly insane because it would starve to death in that form in most situations. Wizards of the Coast is in love with this thing right now, which probably should tell you everything you need to know about it. This is a monster for a lazy DM who can't think of an appropriate trap or other challenge for their group. If I were a 5e player, I would be shooting arrows at every treasure chest I encounter. But my players, they don't have to worry. I've taken the no mimic pledge. Just like 7-Up with caffeine, my campaigns never had them, never will. Well, there you go. I'm sure I stepped on a few toes. Maybe you like some of these creatures that I don't happen to. That's okay. Tell me why I'm wrong, and tell me how they got used to good effect in your worlds. I'd love to hear from you. Remember, too, to join us for The Lair every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We talk to interesting people, keep up with all the ways Wizards of the Coast is shooting themselves in the foot these days, and generally try to have a good laugh. We really hope to see you guys there. All right, you guys take care, and have a great, great rest of your day. Goodbye.